The Daley Grind with Joey Daley.
We'll talk about that too.
Is this going to be a counseling session for you?
Yeah, this is just my way of getting a free counseling session. Want to be on my podcast? I start telling you all my problems. Okay. Thank you for being on the podcast.
You're welcome.
Oh,
Thank you.
Is it all right?
Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I think so.
Yeah, it's just out there a little bit. Kristen Hicks, and you own your own ecotherapy practice?
I do. It's mental health, so it's all of it, but I practice ecotherapy. It isn't very common here in Ohio, so not a lot of people know what it is.
What is ecotherapy?
That's a big question. It encompasses a lot of different things, but it's mostly about our connection to nature and how that impacts both our physical and mental health, and how we just exist as a society. It encompasses all of the areas of psychology. So even like spirituality can be in there, and all of the areas of mental health can be addressed with ecotherapy.
Yeah. So when we initially spoke, you talked about in other countries they bathe in the jungle, in the forest.
Yes. In Japan, doctors are prescribing something called Shinrin-yoku, which is forest bathing. And it's not you go out and take a bath in the forest. You just go into the forest and immerse yourself in it. Oh,
sorry. I thought you said actual bath, and I kept thinking, do you dig a hole and just wait for the water to fill up?
Or just like mud baths. No, they just go out and just exist in nature. Pay attention to the sounds and the sights. It's really just an immersive sensory experience. And doctors are prescribing that in place of antidepressants. I don't know exactly what they would prescribe, but if you imagine 3 times a week for an hour, rather than taking a pill every day, it has really amazing health benefits that don't have any side effects.
So do you think ecotherapy and connecting with nature can do just as much as depression medication? Or could it?
That, I think, a lot of these things are going to be on an individual basis, depends on the person, because some people do benefit from some kind of medication. Other people, they're finding, are benefiting through placebo. Just, they feel like they're doing something by taking a pill every day, even though it's, the actual benefit of it chemically is negligible. But they can benefit from ecotherapy. They can benefit from just being outside, taking time for themselves, bringing themselves back into their bodies, because we forget about the sensory part of just existing as humans.
Yeah.
And when we are depressed or anxious, depression is about, feeling your feelings about something that happened in the past, regrets or grief or whatever. Anxiety is about what may or may not happen in the future. But ecotherapy helps bring the person back into the present moment and grounds them in their body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So you're just really soaking in the moment, and you're not thinking about the past or the future, and just enjoying every second.
Mm-hmm. And you've probably heard mindfulness is a big movement. This is very mindfulness friendly.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think it's so hard for people to do? Why do people look so much in the past and project in the future?
I think because we can. We're comfort-seeking creatures, so we tend to make our lives as easy as possible, but that frees up our brain to start, ruminating on things, or imagining things that may or may not happen. I don't know, how into neuroscience do you want to get today?
Well, a lot of people are, 90% of what you worry about doesn't come true. Like, it's an actual study. So that could be a big depression and anxiety. People just thinking doom and gloom, something bad's going to happen.
Yeah, well, one of the most important things that I do in sessions with clients is help them forgive themselves. Because often if they're depressed and there's something that's got them stuck in the past, like a part of them is stuck there, it's because something hasn't been resolved. Well, I've forgiven this person. I've done the work. I've moved on. Well, have you forgiven yourself? Because a lot of the problems that people have that persist are related to the ways that they responded to bad things that happened. Trauma isn't just about what happens to you, it's also about what you do in response to what happens to you. That's not necessarily a choice, like a survival response. So people feel really guilty and regret things, and a lot of the work that people do in therapy is just forgiving themselves for the choices that weren't really choices.
Yeah. What do you think social media does to people, adults and children these days?
I think social media can create an unrealistic ideal, the false self, I guess, quote unquote, that people have to live up to. And so authenticity is kind of put on the back burner. You know, they have to live up to a certain ideal, certain expectations. And you can do that on social media. You can present whatever you want to present. But there's a certain amount of all those feelings that are less fun, I guess, that are usually not posted or ignored if they are posted.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that, ecotherapy is about, kind of releasing the false self and coming back to, it's breaking all of that down and then building up who you really are. And I have this love-hate relationship with the whole idea of personality because personality it's permanent, if that makes sense. Whereas behavior is changeable. And I work with kids a lot. So one of the things that we talk a lot about is, you're a good kid who made a bad choice, right? Personality, you're good. You're a good person.
Yeah.
Who made a bad choice. But you can fix that or you can apologize for that. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. So I tend to focus on behavior, not on who the person is. I don't like putting labels on people because that's saying, well, this is you. And then people become that. Whereas if you focus on the behavior, you can talk about, well, what are some other ways that you can modify this behavior so that you can, connect with people more, or you can be more successful in a job, or just generally be happier and more content.
Yeah.
Well, I tend to not I don't want to know much about, past diagnoses. I have an intake form that I kind of get a good idea of what we're going to be working with, so I know what questions to ask in the assessment. But for the most part, I like to have a clean slate, and I just like to meet the person. Tell me about you. You tell me about you. You're the one who controls your narrative. I want to know how you see yourself. I don't want to know what everybody else says about you. What do you believe about yourself?
Yeah. Do therapists get depressed sometimes and have to see other therapists?
Of course. Yeah. I think a lot of people think that we have it all together. We're people too. So yes, counselors have counselors. Is
that because of the things that you hear with people? It's very probably troubling, some of the stuff.
Yes. Actually, I tell people a lot during my master's program, they made us do self-care check-ins. Like every week we had to report to our cohort what we were doing for self-care. And at the beginning it was really funny because we were like, I had lunch today, or I got a full 8 hours of sleep. And it was just basic needs. But as time went on, our self-care evolved. I spent some time with my family. I reached out to somebody I haven't talked to in a while. I, took a weekend and just did my own thing quietly with my journal or whatever. So it evolved over time. So we had to learn that skill, and it's a skill that everybody needs to learn. Yeah. Counselors have had to learn it, but it doesn't mean that we don't need a place to process too. So yes, we carry a lot when we're holding space for other people because we're sharing the burden of the pain that they're feeling, which makes it easier for them to process. But that does take a toll. So.
Do you think there's therapists out there that have just kind of zoned out, that have given up, that just listen and just want you to keep coming back for money, and they don't care if you're fixed or not?
Anything's possible.
I would say there would have to be some that, are just in it for the money and they don't want to fix you.
Well, I don't believe that anybody can fix anybody.
Well, not fix, but they don't want to say, they want to say, see you next week. We have a lot of things to work on.
Yeah.
It's more income.
So there's 2 points to that. First of all, there's something called compassion fatigue, or actually I think they've renamed it to empathic distress. I think that's what they're calling it now. But it's basically if you kind of burn out on being able to provide that compassion, that compassionate space, that listening, and holding, and feeling with the client. So yeah, I think that when people reach a point of compassion fatigue, it can be dangerous both to the client and the clinician. And so that's when, some interventions probably need to be had, whether that's counseling or vacation or whatever. But that's a really hard problem to solve. So I always encourage people to prevent it versus having to deal with it when it does show up. The other thing is the work that gets done in sessions is the responsibility of the client. So if the client is not making progress, part of it's the responsibility of the clinician. If they're not giving helpful feedback or homework or whatever, then that's a problem. But if the client is coming back with the same problem over and over again, and nothing is ever getting resolved, then that means that the client may not be doing the work that they need to do.
Yeah, and it could be time to change therapists.
Yeah, and sometimes people have to go through 3 or 4 therapists before they find a good fit. So the therapeutic relationship is a really important part of it. If you don't have a good relationship with your therapist, find a new therapist.
Yeah. Children, I would imagine, is a very touchy subject when it comes to therapists. A lot of parents probably want their children or child to go see a therapist, but they're worried that they get a bad one that could really do damage to their kid. Mm-hmm. What can you say to parents out there that want to get their kids into therapy? How do you research someone and find the right therapist for your children?
That's a good question. When a child is new to my caseload, usually the parent sits in for at least part of the first session, if not the full first session.
That's a good idea.
To kind of get a good idea of, what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
Get some, give the therapist some direction on what needs to be done or what concerns are there. But when it comes to kids, I like to work with the parents as much as I work with the kids.
Yeah.
Because kids are a product of their environment, right? And they don't have the ability to make decisions. So if the parent's there and I can model behavior for them, I can give them intervention ideas in the session while I'm doing that, like while I'm working with the kid. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just helpful for them to vent a little bit about what's going on, you know? So kids are a product of their environment just like the rest of us are.
Do you think friends have a huge influence on kids? Can you have just the most perfect kid ever? He gets mixed into the wrong crowd of kids and he just goes in a completely different direction. Are you more influenced by friends than you could be your parents?
I think, developmentally speaking, that's a really normal thing for adolescents and teens. They rely more on their peers for feedback and advice than their parents. Unless they have a really good relationship with their parents, and that's always the goal.
Yes, I believe in that. Open, honest conversations with your kids where they can come to you with anything. Mm-hmm. So with me, with my kids, if they did something wrong, it was hard for me to punish them because, if you punish them every time they come to you and they did something wrong, they're not going to come to you probably ever again. So I always just like to talk about what did you do? How could you have done that differently? And work through it like that. And still to this day, when they mess up, they tell me about it. Mm-hmm. And I could have shut that down instantly. Yeah,
punishment only tells a kid what not to do. It doesn't tell a kid what to do instead. Mm-hmm. So unless punishment is paired with reinforcer for expected behavior, it's not going to really do a whole lot, except for create a really tense relationship between the parent and the kid.
Yes. So if someone out there, which I'm sure there is, has a kid in middle school that's just causing all kinds of problems and the kid is just acting way out of character, what would be their first step to try to get to the bottom of what's going on with their child?
First step. Talk to your kid. Find somebody that kid is willing to talk to. If it's not the parent, is it a coach or a teacher or, a family friend? As long as it's somebody that they have a healthy affirming relationship with. They may confide in them and tell them what's going on, but sometimes often it's not going to be the parent.
That's a good point. You could call a basketball coach and say, Billy's having problems. Would you mind sitting down with him after practice and find out what it is? That's interesting.
Yeah, somebody who's got a good relationship with the kid.
Yeah. So the first step is finding out why the kid's acting out, and then
the first step is building a relationship. If it's not already built, that's the first step. Healthy relationships. That's where healing happens.
Yeah. Well, I'm learning a lot here today. I should have did this years ago. Wow.
I'm going to bill you afterwards.
Gotta make this quick.
Just kidding.
That was such a good answer that you just gave that I forgot what my next question was going to be, because it really is all about relationships. And if you have a healthy relationship with someone, then things naturally just happen and you can communicate.
Exactly.
If it's unhealthy, someone's not telling someone something because they don't want to hear it from you.
Yeah, it's not safe to do so. You want to create a sense of safety in that relationship.
Yeah. Safety, whether you're saying something that the person disagrees with or something that, whatever it might be.
I think that's a really big part of healing that a lot of people, or just existing, that a lot of people don't really value, is emotional safety, which is not the same as physical safety. I mean, I'm not expecting you to jump across the table and pummel me. But, on some level, I am a little bit nervous because this is an exposure, right? So emotional safety means you're comfortable and you know that you're not going to be emotionally annihilated. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in the sense of like a relationship with a kid and their parent, maybe the parent doesn't hit them, but maybe they're super critical, or maybe they're they're really sarcastic, or they call names or whatever. That creates a sense of that the kid's not safe.
Not safe.
Right. And so they're not going to be able to open up and disclose. And like I said, there's a lot of neuroscience in here that I find fits really well with ecotherapy, where if your survival response is on, your thinking brain is off. And language is in the thinking brain because that's a higher function that you learn after birth. And if you're in your survival brain because you're feeling unsafe in a situation, you're not going to be able to talk things out. You're not going to be able to think creatively and solve problems together. So you have to create that sense of safety, not just physical, but emotional. And the thing with ecotherapy is a lot of times when you're outside, there's a sense of physical safety that's missing,
Yeah.
A lot of people don't feel safe in the outdoors until they're taught how to manage what's going on. We were talking on the way up the stairs how there's no bad weather, just bad clothing. If you're dressed for the weather, then you can be out in the snow all day.
Yeah.
So physical safety and emotional safety, both important.
Emotional safety, I like that. Emotional safety. I've never heard that before. You've got to feel emotionally safe to talk to people. And I think so many parents out there, if a child came home and said, I smoked marijuana, how could you do that? What if so-and-so finds out? Get up in your room right now. And they think that kind of, that pressure and that intimidation is going to keep them from doing that. But in my opinion, I'm no therapist, but I don't think that's going to work. I just think they're never going to tell you again when they smoked marijuana or tried another drug.
Yeah, depending on the relationship, they might do it just to make you angry. I mean, that's pretty typical, just that rebellious, rebelling.
Yeah.
Kids, teens, and adolescents are starting to figure out who they are. They're trying on new identities. They're trying to separate from their family of origin. And so if parents aren't willing to let them have a little bit of slack to be able to make a few mistakes when they're young, then they're going to do it anyway and not have any support when they do.
Yeah.
Or they're going to be the perfect citizen until they go off to college or out of the house, and then everything falls apart and they make much bigger, more costly mistakes. So allowing teens to have some space to kind of figure it out and to be that safe place where they can come and say, I screwed up and I need help.
Yes.
It's super important. And, parenting is just a process of letting go a little bit at a time.
Yeah. Yeah, which is so hard for the parent, but the kid, like you said, they want to detach at a certain age and become their own personality and hang out with their friends. And I was at a restaurant talking to someone, they were empty nester, and they were talking about how difficult that is. And they know some their friends that are really struggling with that, like lost their entire identity. Have you seen that through?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I see that all the time.
How do you cope with that?
Well,
How do you cope with empty nester syndrome?
that's a great thing for parents to do when their kids are being teens and trying to figure out who they are. The parents can kind of rediscover who they are, do their own thing. Have, time apart from their kid. They don't have to be policing them all the time. They don't have to be with them all the time. They could go out and do something, and make their own friends so that when the kid does leave, as they should, when they have reached a certain age, the parent has friends, they have healthy activities that they can do, they kind of have a sense of what they're about and who they are, apart from being a parent.
Yeah. So a parent needs to practice that before the time comes.
Sure.
That
Ideally, they should be doing it all along.
Yeah.
So they never lose it. But
yes, that would be the key right there. But so many parents, I think their lives revolve around their kids, and they just don't have any other identity but their kids. And when they go off, it's like, what now?
Yep.
Yeah. Chapters in life.
It is fun to get kids together, though, especially the teenagers when they're like to kind of watch the dynamics unfold. And
Yeah.
Oh, but when we were talking about emotional safety, that was one thing we did. I did an internship with adventure therapy, and one of the things that was a rule from the beginning was we're going to, we're going to support each other. We're not going to sit here and tear each other down or criticize each other or even push people too hard. Like, some people have never climbed a rock wall before. If they don't want to do it, that's their choice.
Get up there, you loser. Grab onto that.
Exactly. Or even nicknames can be sort of, off-putting to a kid if they're feeling really insecure in that space, right?
Yeah.
Once the group had gelled and they had established a sort of group, flow, then they could start, as long as it was okay with everybody, they could start making names for each other.
Yeah, as long as they're
right.
polite nicknames.
Well, it doesn't even have to be that, but as long as everybody agrees on it, that's fine. But
Yeah.
But sometimes one kid will get singled out, and
So you'd say,
they won't object to the nickname, even though it kind of hurts their feelings. So just to establish the emotional safety and make the rules right from the beginning, so that the kids have this opportunity to gel as a group.
Yeah. I wonder what my nickname would be.
My friend out in Colorado, she has rock climbing.
Oh, yeah.
She doesn't do she does adventure therapy. They're very close. But she has human trafficking survivors that she takes rock climbing. And sometimes they say, I don't want to do that. And she says, okay. And they're like, what? And she's like, your no matters. So you don't have to do this. And just being able to say no makes them feel safe. And eventually they get to a point where they can actually go out and do stuff. Take the, get on the rock wall.
Yeah.
And do the thing. But they need to establish that sense of agency first.
So it's important for someone not to feel pressure to do something. They feel like they did that on their own, and then they accomplish that goal.
Survival brain needs to say no before it can say yes. It needs to say, I have control over this situation. And if somebody's feeling nervous about doing something hard that they've never done before, allowing them to say no. It's challenge by choice. That's kind of the concept.
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything. This is all, anything that you do is your choice. Nobody's forcing you to do anything. You set your own goals. We'll just provide opportunities and affirmation.
Yeah.
So I'm a social worker, and that's a little different than a counselor, because counselors tend to focus on the psychology and the inner world and the micro practice. Social workers are about, both, micro and macro. So systems and how systems work together. So a smaller system would be like a family system. How does the family dynamic, what's the ecosystem that this person is living in, right? And how does that impact them? Because sometimes you're going to have one person who's really sensitive to the family dysfunction, and they're the ones who are exhibiting the symptoms.
For those families out there that just are not getting along and they haven't spoken to each other in months, even years, what could be the first step for someone in that family to mend relationships?
That's a really good question, and I think it depends on the family system. Is it the person that everybody thinks is the problem, or is it somebody else who thinks that someone else is the problem?
Let's just say there's one person in the family that's normally what happens, and they say this person is just tearing the whole family apart. So holidays are separated, birthdays are separated because these two people can't get together.
So that's a tricky one. If a lot of people in the family are pointing fingers at one person, that usually means that that person is just they have a sensitive nervous system, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of like having the canary in the coal mine, right? They're the first ones that are impacted by toxicity. They're the indicator species. And an indicator species is a species that if it starts to die off in an environment, that's an indication that the environment is polluted. So a lot of times the person who everybody thinks is the problem, who is exhibiting outward symptoms of, mental health problems or whatever, they're just kind of the indicator species in that family ecosystem, which means there is work to be done with the entire system, because maybe communication or the other ways that they relate to each other are really dysfunctional. And so my approach would be, let's find out how this environment is impacting everybody, and what are some changes, small changes that we can make to support the person who's struggling. Because, it's a family member, right?
Yeah.
The goal of the therapy is to help the family work together better. Although a lot of people will come in and say, hey, fix my sibling or fix my kid or what. I'm like, I don't fix people.
Yeah.
I help people heal themselves.
Yeah. So in that family dynamic, there's one person that is much more sensitive to whatever might be going on in the family, and that person may need more love, may need more understanding. That's the person that maybe the family should get together and have more compassion and sympathy for, and start there, and that would work its way outward to the other family members.
Yeah. When I used to do family therapy, all the time, there were assessments that we did at the beginning where everybody kind of had the opportunity to say, here's what I think the problem is. And a lot of times they did not match up.
Really?
Yeah. The person who, was the client, because Ohio doesn't allow the whole family to be the client, you got to identify one person. So the person who was the identified client would have a vastly different interpretation of what's going on than their parents or their siblings or whatever. So just kind of figuring out what everybody thinks is the problem.
Yeah.
That would be the first step. The next one was having everybody create their own eco map. Eco maps are so fun because the person is in the middle of their own little ecosystem, and then they have little bubbles around them with all of the people and activities and obligations and, everything that's in their environment that impacts them in some way around them. And then they get to say, this relationship is really strong and positive. This one's really negative and or this one's really weak, but it's positive and I want to make it stronger or whatever. So you kind of get an assessment of what their goals are too.
Yeah, interesting. That's a great way to do that. Is that with kids or adults or both?
Both. Yeah, family counseling's really fun.
Yeah.
Because it's not about fixing somebody. It's about, let's figure out what the dynamics are, among all of you. And what little things can we do to change it so that everybody's working better together?
I've had so many people tell me you need fix. That's not the right thing.
No, I hear that all the time, and I'm like, we're not, and that's normal. That's the Western, philosophy of human mental health, that we are somehow I can't remember what they call it, flesh machines or something, where we're like robots, and if we tweak this chemical or if we, change this little thing, the machine will work better. But we are so much more complex than that.
Yeah, I would think so. So if you had a family in here, the best way would just be start with the first person. Start with what do you think the family problem is? And then go on the next one. Then by the time you get to the eighth family member, there's probably arguing going on, I'd imagine.
Yeah. Actually, that first session's assessment, I kind of step back and say, here's a question. I'm going to let you guys figure out how you want to answer it. And I just observe. I observe family dynamics. I observe the way that they're communicating with each other. What are the small, like the facial expressions and the nonverbals?
Yeah.
Who can sit next to who cannot sit next to who.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, it's kind of fun to observe and then kind of like shift things around. That's a structural family therapy. I can't remember who did that one, but that was also part of my training.
Yeah, that sounds like that would make sense. Would you be able to like just take each family member out one by one and then see how everyone interacts? And now everyone's getting along, but Johnny's out in the hallway. And so you're like, Johnny, you're the problem. Get back in here.
Well, sometimes that happens where everybody wants to trash the one family member. And a lot of times I call that like family scapegoat syndrome.
Yeah.
They've got one scapegoat. This person is the one who is exhibiting the behaviors that are unexpected, that create some tension in the home. And so everybody thinks that they're the problem. And if we just eliminated that kid, or you fixed them, then everything would be fixed. But that's not how it works. That's not how systemic change works. It's slow and it requires change from everybody.
I have a wise aunt that once told me the hardest part of her life was learning to accept people for who they are and what they do. She told me, if you do that, it makes your life a lot easier.
That's true. I would love to add on, if you're open to considering that there is, a huge chunk of ice under the water that you can't see, that you don't know about. You just see the surface part of that iceberg, but underneath is a huge story that you don't know about. Then that can give context to behavior. Then you can look at a person and say, I don't know what happened, but, I can see that this behavior is coming from somewhere. It doesn't mean you're a broken person. It means that something happened to you. I don't know what it is. I can have compassion for you, and I don't have to excuse certain behavior. So it's a loving response with a boundary.
Yeah.
So, like I was saying, I'm a social worker. So our whole thing is person in environment, right? So it's not just about what's going on in your head. It's about how you're impacted by the systems and the environment. And ecotherapy widens that and says the environment, the natural world, is a very big part of mental health too.
Yeah.
If you have, there is research that says people who have more trees in their neighborhood are generally happier, or people who have more birds in their neighborhood are happier.
Oh,
and
wow.
They're correlated. Who knows if there's causation, but what else? Kids who spend more time out in the natural world have better health outcomes as adults. They're doing research on, Florence Williams has this really great book called The Nature Fix, since we're talking about fixes.
Yeah.
And she went out with researchers who, put an EEG cap on her and swabbed her mouth for cortisol and all that stuff. And then she went kayaking for a while, and then she came back, and all of the levels had changed and were more stable. Like the cortisol went down, her brain waves changed from beta, which is like really intense, like stressful, the fastest frequency, to alpha, which is a calm focus. And we don't have enough alpha, and that's what we used to have all the time. So, there's, obesity studies and metabolic disease, diabetic, how much we're eating, what we eat, the nutrition is a huge part of ecotherapy. So it encompasses so many different things.
Yeah. Controlling parents. What kind of issues can it cause a child when they enter adulthood if you have really controlling parents?
So, again, everybody's different, but what you may see is when the child or adolescent is at home, they have perfectionistic tendencies. They have to be perfect all the time because they have to win their love from their parents. And then are maybe a little naive and unprepared for the real world, because they've never had to struggle. They've never had to solve their own problems. They've never had to be creative, because they've always had the answers given to them, and the agency is not there, right? So yes, like you said, indecisive can be a byproduct. Another one would be, they just rebel. They want nothing to do with you. They make bad choices on purpose. They make self-destructive choices on purpose. They, if they're not allowed to make mistakes, then, when they get out into the real world, the mistakes are a lot bigger, more costly, more life-changing. So adolescence is a time to explore both identity, what am I going to do if I'm in this situation that's a little bit sketchy? Who can I call? If it's my controlling parents, probably not, right? So, if they have a good relationship with their parents, the parent trusts them to make choices and then is able to, help them be accountable if they do mess up, in a productive way, not in a punitive way. Then they can learn to make healthy decisions before they're on their own making bigger decisions.
Yeah. My son had friends that wanted to stay up all night when they would spend the night, and he didn't want to, because I'd let him stay up as late as he wanted. He'd have soccer the next day, so I'd be like, let's go. And he learned I was exhausted all day long, so he didn't want to stay up late. And so his friends would spend the night. He'd go to bed at midnight, and his friends would stay up till 4 a.m., the ones that had a curfew. So, yeah, yes. I do believe at a young age, let them learn those lessons.
Natural consequences.
Yeah, he'd leave the house without a coat. I didn't care. He was freezing. And then he eventually would dress warmer.
Yeah. And of course there needs to be like a certain,
boundary. I'm crossing bad parent boundaries here.
No, I think you're just entrusting your kid to make choices and then holding them accountable if the choice is not a healthy choice,
Yeah.
Don't always give the answer.
Yeah.
Sometimes they have to learn through failing, and failing can be reframed as an opportunity, not you don't have to punish them if they make a mistake, because then they're taught that failure is not acceptable, and it's, but failure is how you learn a lot of times. Yeah. Are you allowed to make mistakes?
If it's not going to kill the kid, I think let them go through it and hurt themselves or someone else. Let them go through that. My son was in the backyard starting, he was building a campfire in second grade. And I was watching him and I let him go. And his mom was like, what are you doing? You can't do that. And I was like, let's just watch and see what happens. Yep. And he did it perfectly. And I was like, see, now he knows.
Yeah, my son's the same way. He always wants to do stuff himself. I took him kayaking for the first time. I used to take him kayaking with me, and then I used to tow him behind me in his own kayak. But this time was his first time on his own. And he got stuck in a tree that had fallen down. And I'm just sitting back there. I've got a video. I'm like, how are you going to get out of this one, man? And he's like, I'll do it. And I'm like, okay, well, let me know if you want any help. I've got this. I'm like, okay. Took him a little while, but he got out. And then he felt like a rock star because he did it himself. Yeah. So that's the kind of confidence that you can gain, or a kid can gain, from being able to, kind of struggle a little bit and come up with their own solution. Because the solutions that we may offer them may be not right for them. Maybe they're going to come up with their own solution that's a better fit for them. Yeah. True. Yeah. Parents don't know it all. Now I sound like a kid. You're not my parent. Yeah. Good stuff. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. Of course. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah. Thank you.